Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here for my LCK Cup week number 3 overview and analysis video. Of course, we will be updating everything at the end because this is the end of kind of the regular season stage of the LCK Cup, the group stage, whatever you want to call it. Group Baron versus Group Elder ends here today, or ends this week in the LCK, and we're going to know our first team eliminated from the 2025 winter split, if you will. So a lot on the line. A lot of these teams already have most of their placements already locked in. It's a very shortened week, only 5 best of 3s to cover here, but it is going to set up for some conversations surrounding the playoffs, or the play-ins, if you will, so I'm excited for that. I hope you guys are as well. If you are, let me know down in the comment section below what series was the most entertaining to you this week, and which teams are impressing you more than maybe you were anticipating. Again, we're still going to see 5 best of 3s. We're still going to see every single team play this week, and so it's not like it's a complete off week or anything like that. It's just a significantly shorter stretch of time here, and again, we're going to know everything we need to know about our play-in stage, about the 3 teams that are going to qualify for the playoffs by the end of this video. So let's go ahead and get into it. If you are new here, what we are going to do is go series by series, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each series that we cover, and at the end of the video, I will be giving a player of the week and a dud of the week to tie everything into a nice, neat little bow. I would typically say we're going to update my power rankings at the end of the video, but instead of updating the power rankings, I'm just going to be showing you the play-in bracket and kind of talking about who I expect to win. It's kind of irrelevant who I think is better than who at this point if you can't beat the opponent that's in front of you in a best of series. And so we really are starting to get to the point where it's just matchups that matter, and you know, a lot of these matchups are pretty up in the air. The bottom half of the LCK, as per usual, is pretty undetermined, we'll just say, and it's kind of translated all the way up to essentially 5 downwards are all major question marks, but we'll talk about that at the end of the video. It's time to get into the actual analysis. Going series by series means we get to start with day number 1 and series number 1, and this was a very important one for qualification down the stretch here. It was the DN Freecs taking on KT Rolster to kick off week number 3, and KT is going to pick up a victory here. They're going to move to 3-2 in this group stage, or they're going to end at 3-2 in this group stage, and this puts them in a fantastic spot to be able to grab one of those top 3 positions in Group Elder. Group Elder, obviously already winner's group. We already know that Dplus KIA and Gen.G are immediately going to be going into the playoffs. There's nothing that can be done to get those 2 teams away from that, but KT Rolster really putting themselves in a fantastic spot with this win. It would take a DRX overperformance against Hanwha Life in order to get them into the top 3 instead of KT, although it's very much still possible at 7-6 for KT if DRX is able to win a game. I think they would hold the tiebreaker. I don't exactly know what the tiebreaker would be in that circumstance, but KT does end up taking it 2-1, which does, again, put them in a pretty great spot, and it's off the back of their star player. There really isn't a lot to talk about here. If you don't start with BDD, he is player of the series once again for KT Rolster, and he's probably going to be player of the series for 90% of the series that KT plays throughout the year. It's just insane how much this team revolves around his gameplay. I do think that you got a lot more of a team effort in this one than you have in some of the previous wins that KT has had. I've been, pretty complimentary of a player like Perfect, who I think has been fine, certainly serviceable at the start of this year. I think Cuz generally has been, okay, like league average, which is fine. It's a little bit below what you were expecting from him, but you would imagine that he's going to ramp up. The bot lane, though, has been pretty horrendous for KT Rolster, and luckily for them in this series, that wasn't really the case. They were definitely the better of these 2 bot lanes, and that really allowed BDD to even be more aggressive. But the problem for KT is they just don't really have a lot of confidence, and they certainly don't seem to have any sort of in-game leader. I think adding Wei to this team as the primary support really kind of puts a lot of pressure on players like Cuz and BDD to be vocal, or more vocal than they typically are, and that's just not happening right now. You're seeing BDD forced to be, a major engage threat for this team. I mean, in the 3rd game, like, obviously, who else is going to do it? Cuz maybe can do it, but BDD is the one trying to find flank angles on Syndra and trying to create for the team when he really should be the one trying to follow up with the amount of resources he has. Of course, he is the best player, and so he is able to find a lot of those engage angles, a lot of those flank opportunities, and still be able to create. It's why he's player of the series, because he was just better than everybody else on the Rift, but it shouldn't really have to be his job, and that's something that I do think Wei is really struggling with at the current moment. He has obviously been really scared off by the fact that he has started really poorly here in the LCK. Him and Dectum do not have really a lot of synergy at all, and Wei really has not been good. His mechanics have not really translated all that well so far. You know, a lot of the rookies are going to struggle at the start here in the LCK, but I think a lot of that lack of confidence comes out in BDD just having to take more of an offensive responsibility for being able to create for this team. He was able to do it, but he shouldn't have to. If this team is going to just be BDD and company and like hope and pray that BDD is going to do everything for this team to be able to set them up to do as much damage as possible, then like they're going to cap at like number 5. It's why I want to like this KT Rolster roster, but I can't in their current iteration, even with a win like this, moving to 3-2 and maybe even getting one of those top 3 seeds going into playoffs. I think Dectum was, ironically enough, the second best player on the team in this series. He was actually really good for a majority of this. He was especially good in game number 3. I think a lot of people are going to point to the Jin and say that that's pretty bad drafting. Generally speaking, I would agree. I think it's actually pretty self-sustainable against something like Caitlyn Elise if they want to be super aggro in the early game, and that's likely the reason they wanted to go towards the Jin, but you don't really have a lot of targets to hit in the late game. If you're hitting K'Sante or Sejuani, you're just not going to be doing any damage. Luckily for KT, Dectum was actually doing a great job of prioritizing the squishy targets, prioritizing Hwei, prioritizing Elise, prioritizing Caitlyn when he could get on those champions. He wasn't wasting bullets on Sejuani and K'Sante, which I think really helped out KT's damage in some of these later team fights. I actually think Dectum played fine in this series. Hwei, like I said, was fine. This is probably the best that he has played at the LCK level. I've been very critical of this bot lane, rightfully so, but they were okay here. Certainly, like I said, the better of these two bot lanes. Cuz was good. Perfect continues to be fine, like a league average to slightly above average top laner. That's all you really want of him. I mean, Dudu has not really had a great start to the year, and Perfect is a player that should be able to kind of move up into that top 4 or top 5, you know, standing in terms of the macro and the mechanics that we've seen from him, his ability to just play out 1v1s, and he's kind of done that this year. He's been pretty consistent on the top side. Not a superstar by any means, but certainly a very good player for KT, and ironically enough, right now, probably their second best. Cuz has been inconsistent and really took advantage of one of the weaker junglers in the league at the current moment in Pyosik on the other side, and again, everything kind of comes down to BDD. It should be Viego and Nidalee and Pantheon creating a lot for this team, and it's just not really been the case. And so this is BDD and 4 other guys. If they're going to continue to be that, their ceiling is just inherently capped. They're not going to be able to beat the best teams in the league, but they should be good enough. BDD is certainly good enough to be able to beat on these middle tier teams. And DNF has just completely fallen apart. There was a lot of promise after that first win over Nongshim in week number 1, but that has really proven to not be a particularly impressive feat. We correctly predicted that the 2 worst teams in the league were in Group Baron in BRION and FearX. That's kind of just been the reality of the situation, and so DNF has really had to consistently face a lot of the middle plus tier teams like KT, like Nongshim, like DRX, and they've not really been able to hold up in those matchups, and I think especially recently we're starting to see the flaws in how this team is constructed. Top side of the map is just bad, and if bot lane loses, they don't really have any ways to recover. Life is going to get dud of the series here, mostly for the Elise game in Game 3, which just continues to not work. Elise support is just not particularly productive at the pro level so far in 2025. I'm not really sure why teams continue to go towards it. I know it's probably a scrim monster and it's a solo queue monster for sure, but it's just not worked in pro. Like, it's the best teams in the world that are making it look okay, but its win rate has been pretty atrocious across the top 4 leagues, and so it's really not feeling all that good, and Life, you know, kind of proved that here, losing to a bot lane that many were considering the worst in the LCK. Up until that point, you know, Berserker was fine, but we're starting to see the flaws of everybody else on this team. Bulldog is majorly outclassed in the mid lane. Like, the truth is, he's just not at the point right now where he can compete with the actually good mid laners, and it's starting to get to the point where he's regressed a ton. His best split ever was his rookie split. Ever since then, it's just gotten worse and worse and worse. This is even worse than last year, which I already thought was a step back. I talked about how his mentality had changed to be a lot more passive and a lot less, you know, risky, a lot more risk averse, and it's gotten even worse this year. It just feels like he is not, like, invested mentally. He's getting bad coaching. Like, there's really nothing else I can say. This went from a player that was incredibly promising, that was the youngest player in the league, to somebody whose mechanics can't even really hold up and has a completely warped mentality of how he wants to play out the mid game. It's just not looking good. Pyosik has been awful in 2025 so far. I think that's kind of going under the radar, just how miserable Pyosik has been. Like, genuinely one of the worst junglers in the LCK. Dudu has been really inconsistent on the top side. He's lost a lot more than he's won at the start of this split, which is frustrating because it felt like he was on good pace. It just feels like things are falling apart for DNF, another role player team that just ends up not working out. We see so many of these globally where it does feel like you need to have some kind of star on your team. If you put together 5 like good players, you're probably not going to get a good team. It just feels like that has been the consistent message that we've seen across basically all of the top 4 leagues, and this just feels like another example of that. But for KT, you know, hold on to BDD and hold on for dear life, because he is the lifeblood of this team. Yes, Dectum played well. I think Perfect has been fine. Cuz was fine here. Way probably had his best series in the LCK. There are encouraging things, but KT's perception does not change in my head after this win. This is still BDD in 4 words. Then moving on to our second series here of day number 1 and our second series of the week. And even though this is a 2-0, this is certainly not the convincing 2-0 that I think this team was looking for. It's DRX taking on Hanwha Life Esports. And HLE is going to pick up that 2-0 win. This is kind of the result that they were looking for. They wanted to put themselves in a position where they were clear near the top of Group BRION and, you know, making sure that they were going to get one of those bye seeds into the actual play-in itself. But it really did not come in the way that I think they wanted it to. Yes, they definitely drafted something unique in game number 2, the Anivia top for Zeus, finally allowing him to play something a little bit more aggressive. They did pick Ezreal Elise as a bot lane duo. It's certainly not the most conventional draft in the entire world, but you still would like to see better execution, and it's not even really those players that I just talked about that were struggling in this one. There still are some weird concerns with HLE that just don't feel all that good right now. It's the reason that they're number 4 in my power rankings. It's because honestly, things have just not clicked so far in 2025. For DRX, not a shocking outcome. You're not as good as Hanwha Life, and I think some of the players kind of came back down to earth in this one. You've had a really, really good start to the year. Teddy was back here instead of LazyFeel in the bot lane. You would think this would be an upgrade. He looked significantly worse than LazyFeel in this series. You know, getting him back I think is going to be a good thing. We'll see, you know, what ends up happening the more he ends up playing with this team. I would imagine that he ends up stabilizing the bot lane. LazyFeel wasn't exactly the most aggressive player in the world. This shouldn't be like a gigantic playstyle shift from DRX, but at the end of the day, they shouldn't be able to go toe-to-toe with HLE, and for the most part, there are good moments in this series where HLE kind of struggling to be able to maintain their own leads and their own sense of positivity. So let's go ahead and get into it. Player of the series pretty much has to go to Viper. It really can't go to anybody else. There was nobody else on HLE that was consistent throughout the entirety of this series. I think Delight played relatively well, and we'll get to Zeus, who I think probably had his most positive series from a reflection standpoint so far in 2025, but Viper was the hard carry here on the Varus and on the Ezreal. He was the one receiving all of the resources from the rest of the team, and he was the one actively stepping up and delivering a lot of those resources. Viper has been up and down, I would say, to start this split. Delight's actually been pretty great as a support. I think he's been the best player on this team so far to start 2025. Viper's kind of been along with him, but I think he has benefited a lot from how well Delight has played so far in 2025, and, you know, maybe some of his name value is propping up some of his performances more than what we have actually seen in the brief stints in the 4 series before this. But this is Viper. This is what he does when the rest of the team is super inconsistent. He can show up against a really good AD carry in Teddy, who, yes, is, you know, just returning to the lineup, might not have the same kind of communication synergy that other players have, but still just be able to outplay him, really generate these gigantic leads, and just carry games on champions like Ezreal that you kind of have to be able to carry on in the LCK right now. It's just good stuff from Viper. This is what you need to see more from him. If HLE is going to really struggle in terms of consistency with 1 or 2 players basically every single series, then you're going to need a player that can consistently win, and Viper should be that guy for this team. He hasn't been so far, but this is a good example that he can still do that. Like I said, Delight was really good here. Elise is not a pick that I like. I've already stated that a lot on this channel, but Delight is right now playing like one of the best supports in the world, regardless of how the rest of Hanwha Life is playing, and I think that that is certainly something to keep in mind. Zeus is going to receive, I should say, a lot of the headlines and attention from the games that happened here, specifically game number 2. He was awesome in game 1 on the Camille, and honestly, if he had had a similar game in game 2, he would have been my player of the series. I think he was the best player in game number 1. It's just the Anivia wasn't quite as dominant. It's fun to see. It's very The Shy-esque, and obviously we've talked about The Shy quite a bit on this channel in terms of how he's played so far in 2025, but Zeus finally feels unlocked. He's been on tank duty so far for HLE. It feels like they've really been trying to put him into that Doran role, and, you know, Doran obviously feeling very revitalized and refreshed over on T1 because he's been asked to do a lot of different things. HLE really succeeded last year when they didn't want to play for the top side, when they wanted to play for their, you know, mid-bot duo a little bit more consistently. Zeus, unfortunately, just has kind of filled that tank role, but in a matchup against DRX where he should just kind of be able to dominate Rich in lane, which he did, you're going to let him off of the leash a little bit, and it did look good. Zeus is still in there. It's just going to be a bit inconsistent. I think things will get better once we get into the playoffs and the series that actually matter. That's kind of always been the case with Zeus, but It's the middle of the map that actually concerns me. Peanut was fine here. I'm not like freaking out over Peanut. He wasn't sensational in this series. I think the scoreline is a little bit better than maybe his gameplay would indicate. He has been concerning, I would say, to start 2025, but certainly not concerning enough in this series for me to freak out. He was definitely the better jungler. But this time it was Zeka not playing well, and Zeka was honestly the only player that wasn't running it in their losses earlier on in the split. He was pretty good at the beginning here for HLE, regardless of how Peanut was playing, and Peanut was running it, Zeus was doing nothing, Viper was super inconsistent. Like, there had been a lot of pluses and minuses for HLE, and Zeka felt like he was the one that was stabilizing the team, but it fell apart here. He almost got dud of the series for me as like a whole. If they had lost a game based off of his stupid decisions in game number 2, which I think was super realistic because, quite frankly, he was awful in game 2 on the Galio. If they had lost that game, he would have gotten dud of the series, regardless of if he stepped up and did really well in game number 3. I honestly considered giving it to him, even though they didn't lose a single game, and that's just how poor he played. He cannot play like this, and I don't know what's going on with HLE right now, but again, it feels like there's one player on the team every series that just ends up like completely losing their minds and just not really playing up to the talent and the potential that we know this team has, and it does keep them out of these conversations for best team in the world, which they absolutely should be in. It's a huge disappointment if this is not a team that's contending to win the LCK, and right now, even with this win, it doesn't necessarily feel like they're on track for that. But for DRX on the other side, they just don't have the talent. UCal is this team. It's very similar to the conversation we had about KT Rolster. It's just that UCal is worse than BDD, not by a ton, but a little bit. He's not quite on that level, and so with UCal kind of being meh, I would say, throughout this series, like okay, but certainly not extraordinary, they're not going to be able to win. This bot lane's not particularly good. Teddy and Ondel don't look like they have great chemistry. Again, it's very early on. We'll see how that ends up developing as these two continue to play more together, but topside kind of got rolled. Rich was not nearly as good as Zeus in this series, and Rich's problems in lane have very much been exposed, even if he is able to survive and, impact some team fights as we've seen earlier on in the LCK Cup. But Sponge is going to get my dead of the series. Sponge has been okay at the start of this year. I certainly have not been frustrated with him. Honestly, he has been leaps and bounds better than what he was last year. It's Peanut, right? Like, Sponge is not a perfect player. If he's going up against a guy who's going to push tempo and be as consistent as Peanut is, he's going to feel the need to try and make something big happen, especially when this team is losing. He tried to do that in game number 2 on the Vi, and it basically instantly lost DRX the game. That's kind of the reason that he is getting dud of the series. He wasn't particularly consistent throughout the rest of it, but I think I would look a lot closer to players like Rich. Like, Rich is definitely a candidate for dud of the series, or even Ondel. If you really wanted to go down that route, Teddy, I think, could really be that. Anybody except for UCal, I think, could get dud of the series here. I just think Sponge made the most obvious mistake, I'll say, for DRX. And again, this is not a shocking outcome, unfortunately, for DRX, because this is a 2-0. They're going to end their split at 7-6 at 3-2, and that does mean that they are not going to be the number 3 seed. If they had won a single game in this series, they would be moving on to the next, stage, to the actual playoffs, and KT would have to go through the play-ins, but because they end up losing this, they end up going into the play-ins now. There is a little part of my brain that kind of wants to say that this is a good thing for DRX, that Teddy coming back into the lineup and having some time to actually, play on stage with the rest of this team and generally not have like 2 free weeks off is a good thing for basically any team. I think the 3 teams that are getting buys going into the next stage, that are immediately going into the playoffs, not playing stage games for 2 weeks while everybody else is, I think that's an inherent disadvantage. And so, I just think generally that's going to be something that we'll see how much it affects some of these other teams, a team like KT Rolster that isn't leaps and bounds better than the pack. But for DRX, they probably would have liked to get the top 3 seed just to guarantee themselves into the top 6, because you never really know what happens in the play-in stage. But I think this team is what it is. Again, they're a slightly worse version, in my opinion, of KT Rolster. They are a really talented team that has one really great player and a bunch of meh players, right? You have UCal, who's going to carry games and is going to dominate a lot of circumstances. You have good players around him, but you don't have superstars, and that means that when you go up against HLE, you should just kind of get outclassed, and that's what happened here. For HLE, God, I need them to get back on track. Like, this win is great. You're going to end the LCK Cup, like, regular season at 7-4, 3-2. You're going to get a bye into round number 2 of the play-in stage. That's pretty good, even though you're on the losing side, the losing group, if you will. But this team just has a lot of weird things happening to them right now. I don't know what's going on behind the scenes, but it does not feel like this team has the same kind of synergy they had last year, and they got to pick that up. If they continue to underperform, or at least be as inconsistent as they have been, they're going to struggle to, reach their goals of being top 1 or top 2. But then moving on now to our third series, our middle series of the week, and it was the most hyped one of the entire week as well. T1 taking on Gen.G, the two most historic franchises, not only here in the LCK, but maybe in the entire world, and T1 is going to get the better of Gen.G. This is definitely a bit of an upset, not only because Gen.G has looked so good at the start of this split, the Bro series notwithstanding, their 3 wins have all been incredibly dominant, and they've been over all of the good teams in Group Baron. Like, obviously, they destroyed Hanwha Life, and that's really the main competition on the other side, but, you know, because T1 has a substitute in, or at least a proposed substitute with how he's playing, he might not be a sub for much longer. Smash has looked absolutely unbelievable for T1 in his time in here. T1 has really struggled to be able to take down Gen.G in best of 3s, let alone best of 5s. It's kind of always been a bit of a problem for them, and Smash comes in, immediately dominates against Gen.G, immediately dominates against Ruler, and gets T1 across the finish line. That's not going to go unnoticed, I think, by a lot of people inside the T1 organization, but let's go ahead and talk about it. He's player of the series. I don't even think that really has to be all that debatable. There were a lot of good options here. I think basically everybody on T1 played really well. I really want to give a big shout out to Owner, who has actually played fantastic at the start of this split. I say actually as if that's a major surprise. We know Owner has it in him. It's just been a consistency problem for him in terms of regular seasons, these best of 3s, where sometimes it can feel like he can check out a little bit mentally, or he can be a little bit too aggro in the early game and get caught in certain situations. Players like Canyon and Peanut have done, you know, a pretty decent job of being able to consistently beat Owner in a lot of these best of 3s domestically, but Owner looked incredible here, just completely outplayed Canyon, and there are some questions about the jungle mid on the other side for Gen.G in terms of playstyle at the current moment, you know, with how the meta has shaped up, we'll just say, but Owner looking phenomenal. He's definitely someone I want to point out. Doran has looked awesome for T1. I don't think he's been, like, this good in a while. I think it was probably 2023, the last time we saw this version of Doran. You know, I talk about 2023 as, like, the Doran breakout party. He was a really good player before that, but that was the year where I think he solidified himself that final year on Gen.G. And I do think that he's playing kind of at a similar level right now, somebody who isn't receiving nearly as many resources as he did in 2023 and is still performing at a very high level. His team fighting prowess has been exceptionally good over the course of this year. Really excited to see if he can keep that form up. He was just straight up better than Keen in this matchup, and, you know, the T1 top lane thing, like, obviously they just make everybody that comes through this system look great, but Doran has shown this level before. It's just cool to see T1 get that out of him again. Faker was super good as a facilitator and was definitely better than Chovy on the other side, which we will talk about. That is necessary if T1 wants to win. Like, you can't beat Gen.G if you don't have a mid laner that can go toe-to-toe with Chovy. Faker has sometimes struggled in these best of 3 specifically against Gen.G. Really nice to see him step up here. And of course, KIA is good as well, but how do you not point out Smash first and foremost? The dude just came out against Gen.G, a team that I think a lot of people had as one of the best in the world, even if you don't have them at number 1 in your power rankings. If you think that loss to Bro was a little bit more consequential than you would expect, and you had them like 2 or 3 even below T1, to have him show up and not just win, but dominate Gen.G like this, it's absurd. Like, this guy is actually mega cracked, and we knew he was good. Like, this is somebody we've been talking about on the channel for quite a while as somebody that was going to make an impact at the LCK level or international level if he ever were to, like, go to, you know, the LEC or the LTA or anything like that. There were a lot of rumors in the offseason, but to see him go up against Ruler and just outplay him basically in every capacity, be better than him in lane, certainly be better than him in the mid and late game, it's just ridiculously impressive. His mechanics are incredible, but his aggressiveness is there as well. It's more than what Guma was offering this team last year, and I love Guma, but what Guma does is very different than what Smash is doing right now. Smash is a carry. He is a resource-heavy, you know, play through him type of player, and Guma is just not that. He's arguably the best weak side bot laner in the world, but I think this team wanted a bit more juice in the AD carry role. It certainly makes things a lot more interesting. I talked about this last week. I'm not worried that Guma has, like, completely lost his spot, or at least I wasn't worried going into this week, but the series certainly made me question that a bit more. T1 likes to fiddle around with their lineups a lot. They did this especially quite a bit when Como was in charge the first time, and so it wasn't surprising to see Smash get a run, but with how well he's playing, like, can you justify taking him out at this point? He's been arguably the best performing AD carry in the league. Like, it's actually ridiculous how good he is, and he is a primary option for this team. They are playing through him, and they're beating the best teams in the world. Smash looks incredible, but for Gen.G on the other side, their flaws right now are getting a bit exposed. I do think that they're not exactly as well attuned to this map as maybe I would have thought going into the year. It felt like this was going to be a situation where the new map just incentivizes and encourages a lot of skirmishes, which should benefit a team like Gen.G that, generally speaking, is just more talented than everybody else across the board. If you have players that can just win 3v3, like, that makes it very difficult to play against that. But what we are seeing is that the slower pace style that Gen.G wanted to employ last year, it just doesn't work anymore. Or at least it's not working in the same way right now. Canyon has looked very lost. Ruler and Duro got completely outplayed here. Duro's been fine. I'm not going to blame him. He's honestly not been the problem for this team. I think Ruler has struggled more than Duro in their losses. Keen was not good here, certainly worse than Doran on the other side, but dud of the series kind of has to go to Chovy in this one. I don't think it's quite this like blow away dud of the series. Like, he was by far the worst one in the entire game. I don't think it was quite that, but it was clear that he had less of an impact than everybody else, and man, he just was not doing anything on the map. This was always the issue with Chovy back in the day. I want to reiterate my thoughts on Chovy because I haven't really had to talk about this in quite a while. The guy hasn't really lost domestically in quite a while, and so we haven't really had to talk about what Chovy does when he feels pressured. When Chovy's in a losing situation, he can revert to that like 2021 version of himself where it's like, I have to carry, I have to be the resource-heavy player, I have to go get as much CS as possible, as much gold as possible, as many resources as possible in order to 1v9. When his team is losing in the early game, he can sometimes fall into that trap. He's done a really good job of working himself out of that, but especially when you see top lane losing, jungle losing, bot lane losing, I can see why he can look at that map state and say, okay, I'm Hui, I have to just farm. Like, I just have to try and get as strong as possible in order to blow up the backline and try to 1v9. It doesn't work. It's a very, very hard thing to be able to execute, and you know, it ends up making him look worse, I would say, in the long run, but he didn't play well here. Faker completely outplayed him, and honestly, he wasn't, like, good. He wasn't even really, like, an average player. He was not particularly good. The positive is that I see a lot of people talking about how Chovy has started off the split bad. That's not been true. I think he's been really good outside of this series. It's just concerning that it happened here. This is not really the performance you wanted to see from him. Hopefully, he can get something back out of it, but it was everybody. Like, it wasn't just Chovy. Canyon lost to Owner. Owner was by far the better jungler here. Doran was definitely the better top laner. Smash completely outplayed Ruler. Like, Gen.G lost across the board. They were the worst of these two teams, and they deserve to take the L. They are going to fall in my power rankings. That is for sure. And just because this team is guaranteed for playoffs, like, this is the end of their regular season until playoffs. They don't play in the play-in stage at 3-2, at, you know, 7-4 in terms of their series score. And so they're not going to get the chance to kind of revitalize themselves. The next time they play, it will be playoffs. And this was not the way to go out in the regular season. And then for T1, this is a really huge victory. It's obviously unfortunate they're in Group Baron. I think they would have liked to be in a better spot, you know, maybe auto-qualify for playoffs, but even more time to get Smash acclimated to playing in the LCK. This dude looks like he could be an absolute menace at this level. It's been a long time, I'll just say, since I've seen a player come into the LCK and dominate in the way that Smash is right now. We could be seeing, like, the blow-away Rookie of the Year and somebody that, you know, turns into one of the best AD carries in the world, basically, from day one. But then moving on to our fourth series of the week here, our second to last one of the regular season, and it's an expected outcome, but maybe not if you follow this historically. It's okay, BRION taking on Dplus KIA, and DK is going to pick up the win. They're going to go 5-0 in the regular season, the only team to go undefeated in the LCK going into playoffs. Of course, that means they will get the #1 seed in the playoffs. Not a surprising outcome. They absolutely should have won this series and should have won every single game here, but as per usual, Bro makes it interesting. It feels like the same thing happens every year. It's kind of like a little bit of a circle for Bro, where they're this team that stays competitive in their losses and stays relatively good looking while losing a lot of games, but is never actually able to win games, even against bad teams. They actually look a lot worse typically against bad teams than they do against good teams, and obviously historically, Bro versus DK has not exactly been the perfect matchup for Damwon, especially when Damwon is good. That has always been a matchup that's been a bit of a nightmare game for them, but it seems that has more so followed Canyon than it has Damwon here as Dplus KIA. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Player of the series is pretty up for debate. This was a team effort for DK, and all of their wins really have kind of been a team effort. This team is just clicking in basically every facet, but how can I not give it to Showmaker? The dude is just playing with so much confidence at this point. It's crazy what he's able to do in games 2 and 3 here as a split pusher, as somebody who's playing the map, as somebody who just wants to take over by himself, solo, like 1v1 or 1v2 in a lot of these circumstances. Tryndamere feels like such a funny champion for the way that he is currently playing right now, and it's just insane. Like, this is a different version even than I I would say like prime Showmaker. 2020, 2021 Showmaker, like that's prime Showmaker. This is a different version than that player was. I think he's performing at a similar level where he is playing like one of the top 3 to 5 players in the world. He was number 1, I would say, in 2020, but he's doing it in such a different way. Like, he was such a team fight god back in the day. He was somebody that really relied a ton on being able to dominate 5v5s more so than almost anybody because he was winning the mid game and he was taking so many leads into the later half of the game. But now he's playing like an absolute psychopath. Like, it's a very different vibe from Showmaker. I think Beryl coming back in has obviously helped that. I think generally speaking, he's just gotten his happiness and his confidence back playing in the mid lane. This team is winning again, which I think really does help his mental. He seems to be a player that is more so affected by the ups and downs of League than a lot of other players, and so the up right now I think is really carrying him really high. Showmaker's just in a great spot right now. He's gonna win my MVP of the regular season. Spoiler alert, like he was the most valuable player in the LCK regular season, if you want to call it that. I don't really know how I'm gonna be doing awards, but Showmaker was awesome across all 5 series they played, and he deserves this player of the series. Even if I really want to give it to Siwoo on the top side, who has been great. He's been the best rookie, maybe outside, I guess, of Smash in the LCK, if you really want to count him. He's been everything you could have asked for in the top lane and then some, even more than what Perfect offered last year for KT. I thought he was going to have a very similar year, number 1, to what Perfect had last year, but he's been way better. I would argue that his laning ability is actually dominant. Like, he is a top 3 laner in the top lane right now. It's pretty incredible to watch him generate leads, and he's a good team fighter. He still needs to clean up in some areas, but generally he has started off with a higher floor than I think I anticipated, and that really showed here, going toe-to-toe with Morgan, who played fine on the other side of this. I'm not criticizing Morgan super heavily, but Siwoo is better than Morgan. That was very clear in this series, and I think that's something that maybe I wouldn't have anticipated from like day number 1, but that really is the case. Aiming and Beryl have been great. Beryl has really been like a lightning rod for this team. I can't quantify what he is bringing to this team outside of the Rift, but on the Rift, he really has been that engaged threat and that, you know, facilitator that they really need. Aiming is the definition of plays his role, is not making mistakes, and, you know, is getting, I'm not going to say carried, because he's doing a good job, but like, doesn't need to be the main character. He had to be the main character a lot last year. He received every resource DK had for a lot of last year. Go look at his stats, but now he's in kind of the role that I think he's best in, and the role that I think he should be in for a top tier team, which is like the 3rd or 4th option, but a really good 3rd or 4th option. You know he's going to get to late game, and he is a really consistent team fighter. He's just not a dominant laner. He's not going to be able to generate these gigantic leads. That kind of opens up Beryl to move around the map more, and it allows Lucid to play for other lanes. It honestly helps this DK team for Aiming to be so consistent at being able to play later games, even if he doesn't have a lead coming out of the early game. It's really, really good stuff for them. And then Lucid probably had his like most meh series. It wasn't a bad series. It certainly wasn't like a negative, but he's been so dominant at the start of the year. He's been a top 2, top 3 jungler in the world, I would say, at the start of the year, that him coming out against Hanwha, who has really struggled for bro and just kind of being fine. Like, I expected more from Lucid, but that's just because the standard he has set has been so high. He was still really good here. DK is really good. You don't get to 5-0 on accident. Right now, this is the best team in the LCK. They are certainly making an argument to be the best team in the world, and they are major threats to go to first stand and to win the entirety of the LCK winter split. And then for bro on the other side, like, we just kind of know what this team is at this point. They're going to be competitive. They have players that are mechanically talented, but they don't have any macro, and they don't really know how to close any games out. And they do make errors in the back half as well, even some of those good players. I think, generally speaking, Morgan was the player that impressed me the most here in terms of what he was able to do, just because he was so far down in resources and still was able to maintain relevancy. I think Polu was generally fine, even if I haven't been impressed with him. Hype looked meh. Like, I'm going to be honest, I almost gave Hype dud of the series purely for that gigantic mistake he made in Game 3. His misfortune was completely invisible, did not exist throughout basically the entirety of that 3rd and final game, and then he also gets caught at around 20 minutes for absolutely no reason and ends up losing bro basically everything on the map. It's just a major mistake that you can't really make at this level, and again, I'm trying to lay off of the rookies because it's really hard to be a rookie in the LCK, especially like all the KT Challengers players are really struggling right now. There really isn't a single one that has come out and looked good. Hanwha, we'll get to, is really struggling. Hype has not looked good. Way has really not looked good for KT. Like, it's just not really working right now for the KT Challengers players, and, you know, Hype is definitely a part of that. I would say he's looked the best of them, but that's really only if you take Game 3 of this series out of the equation. Closer is nothing. He's been fine across this year, but he's not going to be able to compete with someone like Showmaker, especially when he's playing more aggressive. And then Hanwha is once again going to get done of the series. Like, this guy is just not playing well. There's really nothing else to say. He grades out as the single worst player in the LCK right now. Everything he's doing is bad. His early games are awful. He's losing a lot of pressure. His late games are horrific. He had a really, really good team fighting section against Gen.G that I think really popped a lot of people and, you know, gave a lot of highlight clips for people to move around and say like, oh, Hanwha's actually really good. He's just stuck on this bro team. You watch him game in and game out. This dude makes so many mistakes in team fights. He goes for those highlight plays and oftentimes he doesn't get anywhere close. Like, it's just not working right now. The mechanical, I guess, difference between what he was playing against at the Challengers League level and what he's playing against now, it's so massive, and the things that he got away with and the ways he was able to win in the Challengers League, it's just not translatable to the LCK. He needs to find out a different way to win and to play the game and to stay neutral, because right now it's just not working. But him and Hype, I think, were both bad. Closer wasn't particularly good either. Bro is bro, right? Like, they stayed competitive. They were fine across this series. It honestly was closer than most people probably thought it would be, but this is what bro does. They stay competitive and they lose anyways. And for DK, 5-0. Like, this is the best possible scenario. I was talking about this team coming out of the offseason as a team that was like mid, and I was looking at this lineup and saying like, yeah, well, it looks fine, but, you know, they're going to get the 4th seed and go to Worlds again and do absolutely nothing, and, you know, we're just going to keep going with this cycle. It feels like they couldn't break out of that. No, they have completely broken out of it. Lucid is one of the best players in the world. Showmaker is one of the best players in the world. Beryl has reignited this team. Siwoo looks amazing, and Aiming is like the best 4th option in the world at the current moment. DK looks super solid across the board, and really just the hope for them now is that they don't fall off, that they can keep this up the whole year. But that's going to bring us to our final series of the week and our final series of the LCK Cup regular season here. And it might be the most important one of the entire week because it does determine who is going to be eliminated first here in the LCK. It was Nongshim RedForce taking on BNK FearX. And Nongshim is going to pick up the 2-0 win, putting BFX at 0-5, and making them the first team officially eliminated from the LCK Cup, from the LCK Winter Split, whatever you want to call it. Their split is over. They're not back until spring. They will not be in the play-in stage. They will not be in the playoffs. They have played their last game up until the next section, and honestly, they deserve it. We all kind of saw this coming. Maybe not all of us. I'm not going to try and say this was the most obvious take in the entire world, but I had them at number 10 in my power rankings. I know I'm not alone in that front. I know a lot of people looked at this roster and saw quite a few flaws and holes in it, and so, you know, them being 10th, it shouldn't be particularly surprising to a lot of people, them being the first team out. Yeah, it's what we anticipated, I think, for a lot of people. But Nongshim picking up a win, I think, is a good sign. This team is not exceptional. They still are near the bottom of the rankings. I think number 8 does pretty accurately talk about what they are, but they looked good here. Like, they were definitely better than BFX, but they're a disaster on the other side, so let's go ahead and talk about it. Player of the series for me is going to go to Lehens in the support position. He just was the most active player on the map. I think what I said about him in week number 1 holds more true now than it even did then when I said it. It's that Nongshim has a very clear strategy, which is that everybody else is going to play relatively inactive. Gideon's going to do his own thing in the jungle, and honestly, he's been pretty good across this split. I've been pretty impressed with what Gideon has shown, but most of this team is just gonna kind of do their own thing, you know, stay in their 1v1 lane, and then Lehens is gonna play like an absolute maniac. He's gonna pick Elise, he's gonna pick Shen, he's gonna pick a lot of these crazy weird picks that he's been known for over the course of the last few years, and he's gonna trust that he's the best player on the Rift. And honestly, when it works, it looks really good, and it worked here. He was the best player on the Rift, he was creating for everybody, and he was the setup. Now, oftentimes that is going to inflate his death numbers. I talked about this in their first series win earlier on in the split against Bro, where it's like, yeah, Lehens might not have the best KDA across this entire year because he is going to be taking a lot more risks than your average support will, and just generally that means he is going to die a lot more than your average support will, but for the most part, he's going to hope that the advantages that he can get for Nongshim are going to be big enough for them to be able to win the game, and that his creation ability is going to be kind of the X factor that gets them across the finish line. That's exactly what it was here. He was absolutely better than Kellen on the other side of this, who was not good. There's really no other way to say that. This was his worst series, I would say, of the entire winter split so far. I want to give a big shout out to Fisher, though. A lot of people are going to look at Jiwoo and Gideon and Kingin, and I think all of them played well. We'll certainly get to them because I think they were all positives, but Fisher was really good in this series, and he's been fine in the LCK. Like, he's certainly not been, you know, a UCal coming over from the LPL where it feels like he actually, you know, deserves to be here and can compete with a lot of the upper tier, you know, LCK mids. He's not that guy. He's maybe, like, a lot closer to being what we thought Bulldog was going to be, though. Like, he's definitely better than Vikla, who we completely outclassed on the other side of this. Kind of funny because Vikla obliterated him in the LPL when they played against each other in the spring split last year, but you know, it's just how it goes. The development seems to have gotten to Fisher a lot more than it's gotten to Vikla, which we will talk about. Jiwoo was solid. You know, Diablo I think has been the best player for BFX across this split so far, and Jiwoo was just straight up better. Gideon still looks good. Like, he wasn't particularly great at the end of week 2, but there's been plenty of good flashes from Gideon, and that carries on from what I thought was a good spring last year on Bro. Kingin's been inconsistent, but Clear has been awful. So, you know, that's going to be, you know, something that, you know, Kingin should be able to win. Overall, Nongshim gets the job done and does what they're supposed to do. They're going to be in the play-in stage because they are a part of the winning group, and they're guaranteed to do that regardless of how this ended up going, but it is a nice win for them. And for BFX, it's just everything going wrong. I honestly think this roster, I'm not going to say needs like a hard reset because it's way too early in the year to feel like you can go for like a full hard reset, but there are multiple players on this team that I just don't see getting better. I think Diablo and Kellen should probably be staying, regardless of the fact that Kellen was awful in this series. Like, he truly was horrific, but Diablo and Kellen have been the only strength of this team, and honestly, both of them have played really well in the other 4 series. It's just this one that ended up not being particularly good for Kellen, and Diablo has obviously been the strength of this team. I think you could theoretically give Raptor some credence because he was a winner for them. Last year, he was winning games for them, and he does show flashes. Like, he was certainly not the worst player for BFX in this series, and even though I do think you could do better in the jungle, like, maybe you just want to build around him, great, but these solo laners are just never going to get better. Like, Clear is awful. We've talked about it all split long. Dude is mentally checked out. Like, he does not care. He does not want to be there. I don't even really know what else to say in terms of analysis when it comes to him. Like, you just watch him play the game, and it's like, dude is just not trying. Like, there's just no other way to say that. He was already not a particularly consistent top laner, and now he's just turned into by far the worst in the league because he's giving it, like, 25% effort. It's kind of a joke. But Vikla is trying, and that makes it even worse. He's gonna get done in the series here. This guy's just not good. Like, he's not good at any level. He was bad in the LPL. He really struggled down the stretch in the LCS. Like, the days from, like, the KT Rolster Vikla days are over. They are gone, and they are dusted. When you're getting gapped by Fisher, not just, like, losing, but, like, getting gapped by Fisher, that's a problem. Like, that's a really, really bad circumstance to be in. He's one of the worst players in the LCK, full stop. Like, there's just no way that you could ever expect to be a team that competes to not be bottom 2 or bottom 3 with Vikla and Clear as your solo lane duo. I think Raptor, Diablo, Kellen, I think that's a core that you could theoretically build around. I don't think that ever gets you top, like, 4 or top 5. Not that this team is ever, like, reaching for that, but I do think you can be a top 7 team with Raptor, Diablo, Kellen. Like, I think that that's doable. Clear and Vikla have completely eliminated that possibility from BFX, and they've made them the worst team in the entire league. And it's not like Raptor is consistent, and Kellen was awful here, and Diablo's a rookie, and he's super aggro, and he's somebody that gives over resources in order to gain them. Like, this is just not a good team, and they deserve to be the team that ends up eliminated here, even if I don't like the fact that a team is eliminated at all this early on into the split. But congratulations to Nongshim. It's a good win. Doesn't really change my opinion about them all that much. Maybe I feel a little bit better about Fisher coming out of this, but this is a team that's going to rely on Lehen's creation and his aggressive engage angles, and when he's able to do that, this team's going to look great. When he's not able to do that, I imagine they're not going to be particularly good. They're going to be very matchup dependent. I don't see them having a phenomenal run. I don't expect them to get out of the play-in stage or anything like that, but, you know, they're in it, which is, I guess, the most important thing for them. Alright, but that is going to do it for my LCK Cup week number 3 overview and analysis video. Very quickly, up on the screen, the standings after the end of week 3, after the end of the regular season stage of the LCK Cup here in winter. Of course, Group Elder does end up winning. We knew that going into the week. They were already winners, but they very much came out on top, going 16-9 against Group Baron. Pretty good record, and that means the top 3 seeds have qualified. We'll get to that in a moment, but but as you can see on the screen, all of the teams listed in either pink or I guess like this light blue color, they are automatically qualified for the playoffs. The teams highlighted in green have qualified for the play-ins, and the one team in red has qualified to go home and will not be playing another game in the winter split. We'll have to save it for spring. Of course, the big change here is my personal power rankings, and we'll go over these very quickly because quite a bit to talk about here at the end of the video. Only, I guess, one real change here, which is Gen.G dropping from number 1 to number 3, and that means number 2 and number 3 move up. Dplus KIA moves up to number 1 in my power rankings. T1 moves up to number 2. It just kind of feels like this is where we're at right now. T1 feels like they are clicking on a huge level. Smash has really reinvigorated the team. I think they'd be good with Gumayusi as well, probably number 2 with Gumayusi, but they could be number 1 if Smash continues to develop the way he has. And then for Dplus KIA, they're just very clearly the best team in the LCK at the current moment until proven otherwise. It's not just the undefeated record, it's how they are getting there. It's all 5 members looking good and them feeling like such a strong, cohesive unit. Gen.G has some things they do need to figure out that are question marks. I think the top 3 are all very close. I think number 4 is kind of on its own, and then 5 down is just like major question marks about basically all of them. But, you know, there are some pretty good teams in the LCK, and it's not like you get an easy ride. Gen.G falling to 3 is more a positive on number 2 and number 1 rather than an indictment on Gen.G, who I think still could win Worlds. But those are the only power ranking updates. I think everything else just kind of went as expected for me. But that brings us to our, 4 teams that we know the path of, that don't really have to worry too much about the next couple of weeks. BFX, obviously, for bad reasons, they are eliminated. They will be going home, the first team out in the LCK winter split. And then Dplus KIA, Gen.G, and KT Rolster have officially qualified for the playoffs proper, for the top 6, because they were the top 3 teams from the winning group. Group Elder, obviously Gen.G, KT, they had a worse record than a team like T1 on the other side of the bracket, but at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is that their group won, and these were the 3 teams with the best records in the group that ended up winning. So they are going to be the top 3 seeds going into playoffs, and the other 3 teams will be determined through a play-in bracket, which you can see up on the screen now. Of course, the 2 teams with the bye are the 2 teams with the best record, T1 and Hanwha Life, and then again, everybody else is just seeded based off of record. There is no winners group, bias in terms of the seeding, at least for play-ins. There is for playoffs, but not for the play-in stage, which means that they get buys and they only have to win 1 series in order to qualify. I'll quickly give my predictions on this. Again, we're already going kind of long here on the outro. The first one is Nongshim taking on Bro, the 4 versus 5 matchup. I think this is an interesting one, but I'm going to go with what happened in the regular season, which is Nongshim picking up the victory. I do think they are the better of these 2 teams right now, although I don't think it's by a ton. I don't think either of these teams are particularly good. They're number 8 and number 9 in my power rankings, respectively. I do think it's kind of a bottom 3 at the current moment, maybe a bottom 4 if you really hate how DNF has played, but I'm not super in love with what Nongshim is as a team. I just think that they have enough. I think Lehens will be the best player on the Rift, and I imagine that, some of the development I've seen from the middle of the map has been, encouraging. I think Gideon in particular has looked solid. And I think he could take advantage of Hanbok. So I have Nongshim moving on there, and then DRX taking on the DN Freecs. This went DRX's way. I could very much see that flipping. It's really just about whether or not UCal can carry them. UCal is DRX. If DNF get a randomly good performance out of Bulldog, or if someone like Berserker just randomly pops off, like, they absolutely can win that series. All they need to have happen is for UCal to not be the best player on the Rift. If that happens, DRX will lose. There's not a single team in the league that will lose to a DRX team led by someone other than UCal, and so you just have to show up. I don't think that will happen. I think UCal is the best player in this series, and I do think DRX will move on, but I do think it will be close. And then you've got T1 taking on Nongshim in that case. T1 and HLE will qualify. They should be the 2 teams out of here pretty easily. Top 4 feels pretty locked in. It's all just about who you think will be getting that 3rd spot. To me, if I had to guess, I think it'll be DRX at the current moment, because I really do think that UCal is just the best player in the play-in stage, but Nongshim, I think, has a real shot to do that just based off of what Lehens can do, and especially if Gideon can completely out-jungle someone like Sponge in a qualifier series, I could very much see that going that way. DNF, I think, has a shot. Hell, Bro, theoretically, I could have a shot. I think they're the worst team in this play-in stage, but crazier things have happened for sure, so who knows what's really going to go down. My predictions for the 3 teams moving on would be T1, Hanwha Life, and DRX, but I do think it is kind of up in the air in that regard. But those are my predictions. Those are my power rankings. Let's get into my player of the week and my dud of the week. Still doing that at the end of this video. And let me know what you guys think about the new format graphically up on the screen. I really hope you guys like it. I really like this new format, so let me know down in the comment section below. But as you can see, my player of the week is going to go to Smash, the AD carry for T1. It just couldn't possibly go to anyone anybody else. Nobody dominated their individual series in the way that Smash dominated Gen.G, and he did it against what I had as the #1 team in my power rankings. Like, you have to give him credit for that. The Kaisa and the Zeri game in particular, both of those games in particular, were just absolutely tremendous, and he is a primary carry option for one of the best teams in the world right now, for the most historic franchise. He has come up to the LCK and just completely taken over. This isn't even really comparable to someone like Pays coming up for Gen.G, who obviously was pretty excellent from day one, but he didn't dominate quite like this. It took him until the summer split to really figure things out. Smash is doing it from day one. It's genuinely unparalleled what we've seen from him out of his first couple of series. Hopefully he can keep it up, and he was a very easy choice for Player of the Week. My honorable mentions: Showmaker, the mid laner for Dplus KIA. Shouldn't have to go into that too much. The dude has been absolutely electric for DK throughout this entire year, has been probably the MVP of the entire league. And then BDD, the mid laner for KT Rolster. If it's not Showmaker, it might even be BDD. I don't know a player that's more important to their team's success right now than what BDD has been towards KT. That team would be a disaster in a very similar way to what we talked about with DRX, but they're moving on to the playoffs. They don't even have to worry about the play-ins because of just how good BDD is and how good he was this week. My dud of the week, unfortunately, is going to go to Vikla. There's just nothing else to say. At this point, BNK is out, or BFX is out, and they look awful. They go winless in the best of 3 stage, and Vikla is a big reason for that. He was the worst player on that team. It's not even really all that close. It just wasn't a difficult decision. Vikla looks entirely outmatched at this level, and when you're getting gapped by Fisher, yeah, you're going to get dud of the week. So Vikla's going to be my dud of the week, and Smash is going to be my player of the week, but that's going to do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. It lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We're going to be posting about the rest of the LCK Cup, the play-ins, the playoffs, all of that good stuff, but of course, LEC and LTA content coming out later this week. The LPL is back from their Lunar New Year break next week, and so a lot of fun stuff to talk about, a lot of things going on in the world of LoL Esports. First Stand is right around the corner, so plenty of coverage coming your way. If you're interested, hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all